Hey everybody, how are you doing? Welcome to the Wednesday night game hump. We're game huggers. We're doing the game hump. We are. It's gonna be. It's gonna be chill. It's gonna be relaxed. Doing this solo. We hadn't really talked a whole lot over the last week on what we wanted to do for this upcoming episode of the game hump. So, because of that, we didn't really have a lot of preparation for this week. So this is going to be a solo episode, unless by some crazy chance someone happens to join. There's a couple of people that said they may join in, and if they do, fantastic. If they don't, no big whoop. This week we're going to talk about a few things. I wanted to mainly focus on underdogs in the gaming industry. You can look behind me. I've got a few underdogs sitting there. Underdogs in the gaming industry, and I'm mostly going to look at what I would consider the late 80s and then most of the 90s systems that were underdogs. And I'm talking about game consoles in general. I don't mean, like, for instance, say the Sega Saturn. Certainly the Saturn sold a lot less units than the PlayStation or the N64 during the 64-bit / 32-bit game wars or console wars. But 10 million consoles were sold. I mean, worldwide. It's not really an underdog. I'm talking about major underdogs. Game consoles that are so unique and so obscure that hardly anyone has heard of them. I want to talk about a few of those. I want to talk about the games that came out for them, some hidden gems, some of the reasons why the systems failed initially. And if you're into growing your video game library, what you could do, or what some things that might attract you to some of these game consoles. So, with that being said, let's just jump right into it. I think that the very first game console that I became attracted to when I was a little kid, that was an underdog, would be the Atari 7800. Now, that's a game system that I think everybody knows about. I think it's a game system that everybody's obviously heard of, is the Atari systems, the line of systems that they had. The 2600 is Atari's greatest claim to fame. It's like the biggest system they've ever created, the best-selling, most games, et cetera, et cetera. It was a great system. The 2600 was like revolutionary, even though it was also very bad for the game industry in a sense that a lot of the games that came out for it were really, really rushed and really poorly made. But with that being said, I think that the Atari 2600 was a revolutionary game system. Huge thing. They followed it up with the 5200, which was a total disaster, almost from the get-go. I think Atari wound up really trying to figure out what to do next, so they simultaneously went back to supporting the 2600 and then released the 7800, or at least refocused on the 7800. And the Atari 7800 is a system that I think a lot of people can really get into. It's an easy system to collect for, very inexpensive. The game console itself, you could probably get for between $35 and $50 online. The big major issue with the 7800 is game controllers. The game controllers can be faulty. They're easy to break, not so easy to fix, but you can replace them with other, less expensive game controllers. Also, the 7800 has a European controller that came out for it. I believe it was an actual release in Japan. However, I mean, not in Japan, in Europe. It was actually released in Europe, and then it was brought over here. And I think there's some homebrew developers that are making like new third-party controllers for the Atari 7800 that work fantastically. The new 7800 controller is very similar to like an NES controller, or it's very similar to like it is much more comfortable in the hand to play. The 7800 had two buttons, two different action buttons and a D-pad. That was pretty good. The original 7800 controller is the old joystick style, and in your hand you kind of hold it with the joystick in the middle and then a button on each side of your hand. So it's not perfect, but it does the job. Um, and I think when most people think of 8-bit gaming, I mean, they think of the system in the late 80s that completely dominated that era of gaming, and that was the NES. So that is the main system of that time. The Master System was definitely an underdog in some sorts in that race. I think they had less than 10% of the market at the time. But the 7800 had even less. And I actually really think there's some really great stellar gems on the 7800. I mean, not only first off, if you're looking for pros and cons on should you pick it up or not, the 7800 has complete backwards compatibility with the 2600. So right off the bat, you have hundreds of games that you can pick up for it. Like I find 2600 games all over the place all the time. And those are all fully backwards compatible in the 7800. You can use the 2600 controllers on it as well. So it's actually really, really neat. It's a nicer, slightly more responsive, slightly more reliable console to play your 2600 games on. And what about first-party software? Let's see. What about games that were exclusive to the 7800? They wound up coming out with quite a few arcade ports of a lot of the same games that they came out with on the 2600. There was games like Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong and Joust and your Pac-Mans and all other arcade classics, Dig Dug and Miss Pac-Man and things like that. And the 7800 definitely did them better than the 2600 for sure. The graphics were, I'd say, probably a level below the NES. There were some games that could do graphics that were very comparable, and even some effects that go beyond what I've seen in most NES games. However, I think that it is a definite level below where the NES is, and definitely the Master System. The Master System had potential to be the most powerful 8-bit system out there. I think the graphics capabilities of the Master System are absolutely stellar, but there weren't enough games out for it that could really show off that system's powers. Other than some Fantasy Stars and a couple other games like that. Some of the arcade ports on the Master System were really well done. I think Altered Beast was good on that, and a few other ones were pretty good. But there wasn't enough support on it like the NES had. So many different developers, so many third-party developers, so many different people working on NES games that there's nothing on the Master System, in my opinion, that looks and plays as well as something like Kirby's Adventure. Kirby's Adventure, Castlevania 3, Batman Return of the Joker. I mean, Mr. Gimmick. I mean, those games look and play amazingly. And I think the best graphically impressive games during that era came out on the NES, and it's true. But the Atari 7800 did have a few games here and there. A couple that I would point out that were really, really fun. One was Ninja Golf. That's an exclusive on the 7800. And I think that's one that is super fun. Really, there's only one way you can think about it, or only one way you can explain it is it's a half side-scrolling action ninja game like Shinobi or Ninja Gaiden-ish, more like Shinobi, and half golf game. Legitimately is a golf game. You start off with the golf clubs, the selections, the regular golf game setup where you're aiming your shot and you're giving it the power and everything, and you go whoosh, and the ball goes whoosh. And then from the spot where you're standing to where the ball landed in your next shot is where you have to play a side-scrolling level game. It's amazing. I mean, if it sounds crazy and kooky, it's because it is. It's absolutely fantastic, and everyone should check it out. That's a really good one. And then one of the other games that I actually have, and I think it's a lot of fun with 2 players, it's a blast, is Ball Blazer. The game has some amazing, really, really, really well done special graphical abilities that almost look like Mode 7. The game plays, it's actually really similar to a Super Nintendo game called Space Football. I don't think a lot of people have played that one, but it's actually really similar. And it looks and sounds amazing on the 7800. So I think there's a couple games like that you can check out. And then, of course, all of the Arcade ports are really well done. They're better than the 2600 versions and the 5200 versions, and they're a lot of fun. There's a lot of other games. I can't think of. I think it's Commando. I think it was one of the best arcade ports of Commando as well that came out on the NES, and I think Apple and a few other computers that came out at the time. But the 7800, it's a fun game. It's a fun game console. It's got a lot of hidden gems on it, and the nicest thing about it is it's really inexpensive. So it's one of those game systems that you can just pick up. Local Craigslist, check garage sales, check thrift stores, things like that, because you never know when you're going to see it. It's not as easy to find as, say, like a 2600 or an NES or Genesis or something like that. I mean, I find those just about everywhere. I have a stack of Genesis now. It's kind of crazy. But 7800, I've run into it like 2 or 3 times in my life, and I've picked it up twice in my life. So it's a cool system. I think it's a lot of fun. If I were to jump into another time span, I think that the Virtual Boy is another system that we could talk about. I mean, the 7800 was the unheard hidden gem underdog of the year, or underdog of the era in the 8-bit era. The Virtual Boy is in a really weird, tight spot, somewhere between the Super Nintendo and the N64. It was the mid-90s, I want to say like 94, when the time was coming for the end of the 16-bit era. Nintendo was not letting go of the 16-bit era because it absolutely loved, and everybody loved the Super Nintendo. It was just a great system, a great, powerful 16-bitter. And they were working sort of in conjunction with their handheld market, with bringing a half portable console and half video game console to the market. And the Virtual Boy is really strange. It's a game system where you have a controller, and it has a game wire, and it goes into this visor, and it's like the console's inside the visor, and you put it next to you look into it, and that's where the game is. It's like virtual reality. Unfortunately, the drawbacks, everybody knows the drawbacks of the system were it was only in 2 colors. It was red and black, kind of like the Game Boy. The original Game Boy was green and yellow, or green and white, or whatever you want to call it. But the Virtual Boy was plagued with just red and black screens. So, and also a lot of people had issues with like migraines or headaches or vision issues while they played for extended periods of time. And I don't think I've ever really had those kind of problems, but I definitely know that it does feel like you're kind of being taken away into this alternate reality while you're playing it. And it can kind of mess with your vision a little bit. You pull your head out, and everything is so super bright and maybe a little blurry, and takes your eyes a moment or two to adjust. And I could see how some other people that maybe have eye issues or motion sickness issues, or maybe get easily triggered by migraines or other flashing lights and stuff like that, could have very, very huge problems with playing the Virtual Boy. But with that being said, and another negative for it is it only had 16 games released for it, because it was almost plagued from the instant it was released. Nintendo, as soon as it came out and it flopped right away, they'd pretty much made plans to drop it. There was never a second issuing of the system. There was never a second issuing of any of the games. Like, it came out and in 6 months it was canceled. Like, it was so quick on the market. And I'm not saying exactly what exact times were. It may have been out for a year before it was canceled, but it felt like it was a blip on the radar. I remember it being like $200 and seeing it in the store. I was at a Fleet Farm, which is a Wisconsin farm and materials and supply type store. But it's also like a big box store, like a Target or a Kmart or something. And it had an electronics section, and it had Virtual Boys. And I remember when it first got released, it was the first time I had ever seen a Virtual Boy. Was at Fleet Farm, and I saw it. I was $200. I was like, "Mom, let's get this. She's like, "No, it's no way am I getting you that system." And I'm so thankful that she didn't spend $200 on that, because I think it was 6 months later when I got my first job that summer, or else it was I had a job and I saved up some money and I saw it for like $39.99 clearance at a Walmart, and that's where I initially bought the Virtual Boy for the first time. But it was like within the same year, so wow. Dodged a bullet there by not buying the launch game console. But and it only had like 16 games that were ever released in its lifetime. But now the positives. The Virtual Boy has an amazing ratio of good games to crap games. Almost every game that came out for it was fun in some way. Yuck! There's a bunch of like dead bugs on my computer desk here. It's kind of gross. Sorry. Yuck. Anyway, some dead ladybugs. Hi. Yes, the ratio of good games to bad on the Virtual Boy were like really, really shockingly good. So I don't even know. Maybe I can name like most of the games that came out for it, but like I have a few that I grabbed here. And in my Virtual Boy right now is Wario Land, the Virtual Boy Wario Land game, which is the best game on the system. And it was actually one of the best games that came out that year. It's still one of the most fun platforming games that came out in a long, long time. I actually thought that I liked Wario Land, the Virtual Boy Wario Land on the Virtual Boy better than I liked Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island. Like I really still feel that way because I think it's the best new Mario-esque type game. I know it's a Wario game, but it's like the best Mario game since Super Mario World. Like it was so good, and I felt that way a long, long time because Mario 64, a lot of fun, and Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, a lot of fun. But I think Wario Land on the Virtual Boy is a better game than both those. But a lot of fun games on it. Galactic Pinball is a really, really good pinball game. Great game. 3D graphics and all kinds of really cool stuff. The system was pegged as a 32-bit system, but really the graphics came across as just about on par with like the Super Nintendo. Maybe a little bit more powerful in certain things like the rotation and some of the zooming stuff was cleaner than like Mode 7. It looked better than Mode 7, but like in all honesty, it was pretty close to being just like a Super Nintendo system. And then one of my favorite ones on it is actually Vertical Force, which is a vertical shoot 'em up made by Hudson Soft. It's a lot of fun, really great game. And these all say 95 on them. I wonder if that was when the Virtual Boy actually came out, was in 95. Yeah, I bet it was. Sorry, I didn't do much research on my dates and stuff, but I vaguely remember, and I just say what I remember, or what I think I remember. But yeah, I mean, Teleroboxer's really good. There's a Tetris game. There's V Tetris, and then there was like a traditional style Tetris game. Those are both okay. Vertical Force was really good. Panic Bomber's really good. Let's see. There was a Star Fox like type game. I can't think of what it was called. That was a pretty good game too. But like there's just a bunch of really good games. There was a baseball game that was pretty fun. There was a shoot 'em up. There was a couple puzzle games like a Tetris clone, or actually a Tetris game. And then there was the V Tetris, and I think there was Tetris 3D. And then there was just a good chunk of games that came out for it that were actually really fun. So yes, there was only like 16 games, but 15 of them were actually really good games. I think the only ones I disliked was, I want to say it was Tetris 3D, which was it was like basically like you were looking down in a bucket of little blocks, and the bucket would turn every once in a while, and you're kind of trying to drop the blocks into it in a 3D, pseudo 3D. It was really, really poorly done. That and Waterworld on the Virtual Boy are really not very good games. Otherwise, the whole slew of the rest of them are actually pretty fun. So honestly, I always recommend the Virtual Boy. I think it's a fun system. I think it's a lot of cool games came out on, and I actually really like the game controller too. It's got 2 D-pads on each side for each hand, so you could play right-handed or left-handed, and then you got a B, and then 2 trigger buttons. It's good. It works really well. I think for all the games that came out on it, like the shoot 'em ups and the action games, the Wario game, it works perfectly. And when you're playing in 3D, You can kind of even get more sucked into the virtual reality world that you're in if you put headphones on, because the sound on the system, I actually love the sound quality on that system. I think that it's I've said it before on like the PC Engine FX forums and on a couple other forums online. I think that the Virtual Boy uses a sound chip that is very similar to the PC Engine. I think that it has um, the audio and the gameplay and the chip tunes that are in the games. They sound like PC Engine games to me. Call me crazy. I just think there's a lot of similarities to them. Maybe it's because Hudson Soft makes two of my favorite games on it, Panic Bomber and Vertical Force. I don't know. Who knows? I just think it's a lot of fun, and I love the music on it too. I think the music in Wario Land is really, really good. Recommended if you find one, if you can pick it up, go for it. It's a huge underdog. Most people make fun of it when you hear like Virtual Boy or oh, the Virtual Boy, what a piece of crap that was. Um, it's just one of those things that I don't know if I have a nostalgic tie to it or if I genuinely do believe it's a good system, because it's kind of hard for me to differ those opinions and my feelings sometimes. Like sometimes I feel like this is the best thing ever, and then there's sometimes I realize that actually this thing is my favorite, but that doesn't make it the best. So I don't know. Virtual Boy is really cool, and I have a lot of fun with it. I don't know. What are your opinions? What are your opinions on the Atari 7800 or the Virtual Boy? What are some serious underdogs that you guys know about? There are some other ones that I wanted to talk about more, but I don't personally own them, or at least I don't anymore. And that was like the Philips CDI. The CDI came out before the Virtual Boy, right towards the middle-ish of the 16-bit era. It came out. Most people, when they think of the CDI, they think of the Zelda and Mario games that came out for it. When Nintendo made a deal with Philips to work on their CD technology and the Super Nintendo CD, which wound up just getting thrown out anyway. And people just kind of dismiss it and say the CDI was garbage. And while it's really tough for me to defend the CDI, I don't think it's completely useless. I don't think it's completely without its merits, because there are some games for it that were pretty good. And there were also a lot of those FMV games that came out around that time, especially on the Sega CD, like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, and I think Mad Dog McCree and a few other ones that were those FMV style games. They actually play pretty good on the CDI. There's a few other games that came out for it. There was actually a platformer that's pretty fun on it. There was a Tetris game that came out on the CDI, and I know it's like, oh my god, Tetris has been on everything, which is true, but it was on the CDI as well. That's a very playable game. And then the game that they really, really, really tried to push as like the next gen game on it, our game system, was a point and click adventure game called Burn Cycle. Burn Cycle is both point and click adventure and like FMV, full motion video game. And it was a really cool, good soundtrack, very cool effects, cyberpunk adventure that was, in my opinion, was really well done. I remember really getting into it and almost wanting to get a CDI just for Burn Cycle, but I did not. I never wound up getting the CDI around that time. I got the CDI much, much later on. I think early 2000s for the first time, and I did not keep it very long either, unfortunately. I had it, and I had like an Encyclopedia Britannica CD, and I want to say a soccer simulator game, but I don't even remember that. It came with a one-handed controller that had a couple buttons around the top of it, like in a circle around the main like D-pad type thing, and it wasn't ever going to get played by me, so I wound up selling it later on to someone who was going to get more use out of it. But I don't think it's useless. I don't think the CDI was at all a system that people can just throw away. I mean, on top of that, you have a really unique experience to play on, non-Nintendo made Zelda and Mario games. There's the Zelda Wand of Gamelon, there's the Adventures of Zelda, and then there's another Zelda game along with the Mario's Hotel game. And Mario's Hotel isn't amazing by any means, but they're all kind of cool. They're quirky, goofy games that I wouldn't say you should just completely dismiss it and say it's garbage. Is it better than the Sega Saturn or the 3DO? No, it's not. but there's some qualities to it that I think are cool. And if you haven't, I'm sure if you have it still and you've been a fan of it when you were growing up, you probably still enjoy going back and playing those games every once in a while. I know I would. I don't have those kind of ties to it, but that's a true underdog system was the CDI when it came in, because they didn't know what kind of audience they were even trying to work towards. They were like an education or edutainment system, and then wound up coming up with some like hardcore games with like the arcade ports of like Dragon's Lair or like that Burn Cycle game. That was really cool. But that kind of takes us into the next couple systems that I wanted to talk about. And that was sort of Japan's equivalent of the CDI. And I know that it's going to piss off some PCFX fans, but the PCFX video game system was NEC's follow-up to the PC Engine. Now, if you're not too familiar with the PC Engine, that was NEC's big system that came out in '87 in Japan, and then was ported to the Americas in '89, and they changed the name to the TurboGrafx 16. I do not consider that to be the type of underdog I wanted to talk about today. The TurboGrafx and the PC Engine had its time in the sun. Like, it had its 15 minutes of fame. It was a huge system when it was coming over here. I remember being on the cover of magazines, all kinds of stuff. It could have been the biggest system ever. It really could have. Had the Genesis not, I don't know. There's a lot of debate on that. The holiday season of '89. The TurboGrafx and the Genesis both came at the same time. The Genesis wound up kicking butt. It just was hot, and it had all the arcade ports that everybody wanted to play, and it was just the hot ticket, and it wound up going, and it just blew up. But in Japan, it was a different story. The PC Engine, the Japanese version of TurboGrafx, was much more popular, and the Genesis wound up not being as big over in Japan, and the PC Engine was the system that was kind of in that place over there. So, but the next system on, PCFX, NEC went into the next generation, the 32-bit generation of their console legacy. It was going up head to head with the likes of the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation. And while the PlayStation had really, really powerful 3D 3D capabilities, and the Saturn was a 2D powerhouse. It could do so much, so many sprites on screen, so many layers, so many colors. It was like the true step up from the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, to this next level of gaming that was a 2D powerhouse. NEC decided that they thought that the future of the game industry was going to be full motion video. And they have the most powerful video player of all of the game consoles in that generation. The PCFX video looks really close to like Laserdisc or like close to DVD quality. I would say it's a step up from VCR for sure. But like all the cutscenes during role-playing games on the PCFX look absolutely stunning. They look like you're watching an anime. I mean, they have specific games specials that they came out with every couple months called the Anime Freaks. They had volume 1 through like volume 7 that were mainly just basically like watching anime on the PCFX. And they looked fantastic. I'm a little bit surprised that they didn't wind up just coming out with animes straight up for the PCFX, just saying like, oh, look, season 2 of this is on 5 PCFX discs. You can watch the anime on your PCFX. It natively has S-video output too, so the PCFX quality is stunning. Like, it looks really, really good. Why was it an underdog? Why did it fail so bad? I think it didn't. It was, everyone knew that the system was not as powerful as the Saturn or the PlayStation. Saturn was a 2D powerhouse, but it could do 3D games fairly well. The PCFX had no 3D capabilities. I shouldn't say none, but it has very little. Like, it just did not. They never used it if it did. They really shoved the FMV games down the throats of all PCFX fans. They all the games had FMVs in them, and they were all anime-based games. It was almost like they were looking at a lot of the types of games that came out on the Sega CD that failed pretty badly, like all the full motion video games that came out on the Sega CD, and they were like, that's what we need to do. That's the future. We need to be more like that. And I would even think that the PCFX probably was less capable than, say, the 3DO. And 3DO came out more than a year before the PCFX even. 3DO has a lot of really good 3D effects capabilities that it's able to do too, but the PCFX didn't come with any of that. It's interesting. It almost feels like when you're playing the PCFX that it has the same type of processor as the original PC Engine, because some games have chiptunes in them that aren't the Red Book audio from the CDs that you're playing, but it'll go into like a loading screen and it'll hear music, and it'll be that 8-bit chiptune like PC Engine music, which I love. I love those. I love that music, but you don't expect to hear it in what would be would have been considered next gen game system. But the PC Engine had so many amazing titles on it. The Gate of Thunder series, the Winds of Thunder, Lords of Thunder, that whole Thunder series, Airzonk or PC Engine, the Bonk series, Bombermans, like the list goes on and on and on. All of the Wonder Boy games. I mean, there's kind of just an endless list of great games that came out on the PC Engine. And when you come up with a successor, the next in line system, you expect to see those games, like the sequels to those games, the next series of those games coming out. And NEC kind of just ignored most of those. There were some games that came out for it. I know, like the Far East of Eden series continued on the PCFX, but for the most part, and like Galaxy Fraulein Una came out for the PCFX as well. But for the most part, they tried to kind of erase the slate and start something new. They had games like Battle Heat and Chip Chan Kick and Zeraguire, which are honestly, those three games I just mentioned are probably three of the best games on here. And Zenki FX is another one that's really, really excellent. Holy crap. Somebody must have just joined. I should put headphones on. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, dude. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. I was just your graphics are blurry or whatever that is. I don't even know what that is. Oh, there it is. Or something. There's your owl picture. You know, I was just talking about the PCFX video game system and how it was an underdog. And I was trying to come up with some of the reasons why it failed.
Well, it never got a US port.
That's true.
And then, I mean, they exclude most of the 99% of the library is not really playable by non-Japanese speaking people. So,
yep. Why did it fail in Japan then, though?
I thought it wasn't necessarily. Was it necessarily a failure?
I think that the support dried up for it around 3 years after it was released.
Yeah, I don't know. What's the timing of the console? Was there other consoles that was cheaper, or did the PlayStation is probably the main reason why it failed? Because the PlayStation just blew everybody away.
That is true. The PlayStation and the Saturn, and then the N64 a few years later, were a part of that generation as well. The PCFX was in a really weird spot because NEC was still kind of supporting the PC Engine with the arcade card, and I think a lot of the later Super CD games that had come out for it during that time too. But the PCFX
as well. Yeah, they let that system be around for 7 years. I mean, the PCFX was actually, wasn't it like it was developed 2 years into the PC Engine or something really early like that, and it was delayed for that long?
Yep.
So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, they probably just bad timing.
It's weird. It's very strange. It was a system that I think they should have come out with earlier if they really wanted to, but they were holding off on it. I mean, I really do love the FMV and the video capabilities of it. It's impressive that way, but to ship a 32-bit system without a like 32 or 3D capabilities was not the best idea.
Well, yeah, they put all their chips in FMV because at the time FMV was really impressive. That's something that like a couple like $8,000 computer. I remember when you had to add like MPEG 2 cards to computers, and that was like multi-$1,000 PCB boards. Like I even bought one for like an expansion. I think it was for like a Wing Commander or for some other DOS game. You had to have like a really good video card for it to be able to support the FMV scenes, and it was huge. It wasn't even like the full screen. It was like a little tiny window, and that blew my mind as a kid.
Right.
So yeah, they put all their cards in the FMV boat, and that didn't win.
The FMV boat sank, if you will. So here's where I've gone so far. I've just been chatting for like 33 minutes to myself here, but I went and talked about some of my favorite Underdog systems. I talked about the Atari 7800. I talked about the Virtual Boy. I talked about a little bit about the CDI, and then now I'm talking about the PCFX. And the last game system I was going to talk about was a 64-bit monster.
The Jaguar?
Oh, the Jaguar. That's right. Jaguar.
Jaguar.
What do you have any in your mind that you can think of that I did not mention? And I don't mean like systems that just didn't sell as well as others. Like I didn't want to consider like the PC Engine an underdog because for a while it was like the biggest shit in Japan. And the Saturn as well. The Saturn's got like over 10
million. Right. So, I mean, they actually had commercial success. How did the 3DO do though?
That was a bit of an underdog, sure.
Pretty much a failure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's true. I didn't talk much about the 3DO at all.
Yeah.
I have one, but I'm not as familiar with it as I probably should be.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of things that attributed to its failures. I mean, I think when the system initially launched at $700 in 1993, that was going to be really, really tough for anyone other than the 1%ers being able to buy a game console that costs that much.
The 3DO had amazing arcade ports, but other than that, it really, I don't know, it didn't interest kids that well. I mean, it was like one of the first CD to market, I think, for the American market, because we didn't get the TurboGrafx till a little bit later. But
well, the Turbo CD came out in 90.
90. When did the 3DO come out?
93.
93. Yeah.
Yeah, the Sega CD was out before it too, but I think the 3DO was the first standalone CD-based console. I want to say
entirely CD-based. You know, like I think Americans didn't completely trust a complete CD-based console either, because it was like a lot of the U.S. consoles were like size is important. That's why the Nintendo is like a giant machine, and that's why the carts are like this big. Where like a Famicon's a tiny little guy and tiny little carts.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
I think the last console you're going to talk about was Jaguar.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the Jag.
Yeah, Jag was pretty amazing, but I mean, Atari was already on a sinking boat by the time the Jaguar came out.
Well, Atari had, and we just briefly discussed. I just briefly talked to myself about how the Atari had such a huge, such momentum after the 2600 and just floundered it forever. The 5200 flopped. The 7800 was a system that they really tried hard to push, but it was so late in its life. In the late 80s, I think they even tried to push it up into like the early 90s, like 1990 or 91 even, with some of the arcade ports that had come out for the 7800 towards the end. But it was a system that just couldn't really compete in certain ways. It was a good system for sure, with backwards compatibility with the 2600, but it wasn't on the same level as like the NES. I think the controllers
attribute the 7800 having one of the worst controller schemes.
That's true.
Which has plagued Atari for even on arcade controls. It's hard to really, master like a Tempest controller or a Major Havoc controller. Like they've always been willing to try to do a unique control scheme, but it's not always been successful. The 2600, I mean, was okay. The 7800 is just this horrible controller that breaks. You have to clean it whenever you want to use it. And if we're going to talk about the Jaguar next, the Jaguar is a POS controller as well. It's just very awkward, overly big. And take a game like Kasumi Ninja where you have to do a ridiculous combo, but you have a keypad of, what is that? The keypad of it 18 digits at least. Any of those could have been the special move. They even had overlays. A fireball from the Scottish dude's crotch could be button 1, as opposed to down, back, down, forward, A and B together. Come on.
Yeah, the Jag had I think Ultra Vortec and Kasumi Ninja. They're two big fighting games, and Fight for Life too, which was really bad. But it's interesting because the more I play with the Jags controller, the more I kind of start to like it. Like the D-pad is really bad.
You don't like it, you accept it.
Maybe
Which is
that's
the
what it is.
same thing. I don't like I love Tempest 2000. I'm willing to forget the Tempest 2000, like the controller scheme, and be like, actually, it's not that bad. I like this game. And then I try to make somebody else play it, and then they just, the first thing that they go to is controls. Like, you're just willing to put up with it. I think Tempest also is a good example for, they originally planned the analog controller, which was never released. The game supports an analog controller. You can even do a mod, and the controller the game console recognizes the analog controller, and you have a spinner, which is just like the original Tempest arcade game, and the game's amazing. But that never got released because it just got pushed aside, and them just trying to push out as many console games as they could for that system.
Yeah, that was what really killed it. Was when they just started like throwing on all the shovelware. I've actually seen the Tempest 2000 controller, and it is really slick. I think there's that, and then there was an aftermarket 6-button controller that they came out with it. I'm not even sure what games use the 6 buttons, but some of my favorite games, Flip Out is a really, really well done puzzle game for the Atari Jaguar. It's a lot of fun. It's very unique. It's almost like a mix of like memory and color matching. So it's a weird puzzle game that is very, very strange. It's crazy. This one came out 2 years after the Jag was actually released. And it has a few really, really fun games for it. I don't know if I would necessarily say they're great, and I don't know if they really competed very well with other consoles that were being released at the time. But I think they actually did a better job than, say, like NEC with the PCFX did, because they have more of a variety. It isn't just one type of thing. Like the PCFX excels in like FMVs and dating sims, but the Jag has, even if they're poor attempts, they have a couple shoot 'em ups. They have some 3D shooters. They have action games. They have puzzle games. The only thing I think they definitely don't really have is any RPGs. But there is that Highlander game on the Jag CD that I guess is supposed to be sort of good. So I don't know.
You're making it a speech, man.
Yeah, it's weird.
Also, I think okay. So Atari's name was hurt by then. People, a lot of people in the '90s were concerned with like what's cool. Then Atari was '80s. It was out. It was already like pushed aside. So like I think their boat had already sailed. Because like you said, they just 2600 and up was nothing. Whereas NEC, people didn't really know, and it never really got pushed. The PCFX never got pushed. I think if PCFX would have got pushed to the US, and they would have sold it in Babbage's and whatnot as a, because it even looks like a computer. As a computer, it would have done fine if they would have had any English translations. They didn't even try.
No, they didn't.
By that time, they had put out so many they had so many failures with the TurboGrafx 16 games. They didn't really bring any of the really good Super Graphics library over to the US.
It's true.
So we can blame a lot on the U.S. distribution for the PCFX, the U.S. distribution, and the localization of the TurboGrafx games. And then Jaguar is just like, a failing Atari boat. So even if it would have been like the best thing ever, like, I mean, if you compare, if you put an Atari Jaguar next to me and an N64, I'll probably play the Atari Jaguar. Jaguar.
I actually would too. I'm not a big N64 fan at all.
Well, I don't know, man. You like the N64 was like your favorite console like 2 episodes ago.
Oh, stop it. That was, oh God. Okay. So yeah, the Jag has, it's a pretty crappy controller. It has mostly shovelware-y games, but it has a handful of pretty fun games. And it's weird. Like the sound chip that it used was pretty similar to the Genesis or the Super Nintendos, with maybe clearer voices here and there, but really there weren't any games that utilized any of the sound chip. Like I don't know any games other than Tempest 2000 that has a really good soundtrack. And yeah, it's really strange. Like I know that we were just talking about how Atari was kind of on a sinking boat by the time the Jaguar came out, but the Lynx managed somehow to keep everything, like Atari somehow managed to keep Atari managed to keep the Lynx afloat from like 89 or 88 or whenever it was released to like 93 or 94. And it was a respectable handheld. Like every month there would be a game or two that would come out, and like Electronic Gaming Monthly or Game Pro would review them, and they'd be like, you know, the graphics are great. They did a really good job with this game. I think that there was I'm trying to think of all the games that came out on the links now. There was like California Games, and there was a Ninja Gaiden and Ninja Gaiden 3.
There was a Mortal Kombat, I believe, too. Maybe.
I don't think there was a Mortal Kombat.
Like
There was.
There's a Clax.
Well, of course, there's a Clax. There was a Clax, and there was Gauntlet the Third Age, which is actually the only Gauntlet 3.
The Lynx had some of the very first like handheld arcade ports.
Yep.
And it was I don't know what, like, my timeline is not perfect here. Was it one of the first to market with a color screen?
Yes, I think it came up before the Game Gear. It was that and the Game Gear.
It was really powerful. There was the Model 1 and the Model 2. It had California Games. If you ever played that, like the Nintendo equivalent, I forgot what it's called, but it was really popular.
California Games.
California Games, okay. So the Atari Lynx California Games was really strong. I didn't have one, but I played my friends. I thought it was really good. And the color screen was mind-blowing. The backlit screen was mind-blowing.
Right.
It had a cool design. And they did support it, and there was games often released. I think the price point was actually decent. I don't remember.
I think it was around $149 for the system, which wasn't bad at all.
So yeah, I don't know. Maybe the Lynx did have a pretty successful run, and like a lot of people will still fight for the Lynx as a good handheld.
Yeah, I had one that was actually the first handheld that I ever had, and I had Dracula the Undead for it, which is a role-playing game or a point-and-click adventure game, and I had Batman Returns, which was Atari's arcade port on the Lynx, and God, there was a bunch of games. NFL football was on it. It had voices on it, had zooming, had like some pretty good effects. It was actually a pretty fun game, although it didn't have any modes. It was just exhibition. You could still pick all 32 NFL teams. In California Games, like you were saying, is amazing. The first time I played that, the music on it's really good. The levels are great. The soundtrack's really, really fun. There was the BMX game. There was the hacky sack. There was a surfing, and the surfing level with the water effects, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe how many like sprites were on the screen.
Yeah, it had a lot of colors for the time.
Yep, and it does. It blows away the NES version of California Games. I had that one too, and that was a lot of fun. But man, the Lynx version's great, and it's really surprising that they didn't take some of that momentum that they had and bring it into the Jag, like kind of make some of those games like Big Brother versions of those games, or like sequels to those games, or anything like that. I mean, I know there was a few on there that were kind of Big Brother games, and I know that at one time I think they were trying to do an Iron Soldier on the Lynx, a portable version of it, of the Jag version, which was a pretty impressive 3D game. But I think, I don't know, it's weird. Like the TurboGrafx, I always thought that when a game system came out and it had a pack-in game, that it was kind of your like gateway into what kind of games are going to be on the system, or like a really good demo of what the system can do. And the TurboGrafx had Keith Courage, and it it kind of failed. The Genesis had Altered Beast, and you could show off like all the graphics, the arcadiness of what the Genesis could do. And the Jaguar had Cybermorph, which is an awful game. Like it's so poorly done. And I remember seeing it for the first time in like 93 or 94. I had a friend whose name is Paul, and he's actually in the Game Huggers Facebook page. Paul posts every once in a while. And he actually was a pretty big Cybermorph fan, and he tried to show it to me, and I'm like, this is worse than Star Fox, and it doesn't even have a soundtrack. Like Star Fox it played so well, and the music was amazing, and like all these things were so cool. And certainly it doesn't have as many colors as Cybermorph, but it's just so much of a better game that I don't understand why I would want to move from the Super Nintendo and upgrade, quote unquote, air quotes, to the Jaguar when it's just like not better.
Right. I agree.
What's a good like underdog game system that you're currently into or you're playing?
The Super Nintendo.
Oh, that's the biggest underdog I've ever heard.
People give I'm being serious here. People give the Super Nintendo a lot of shit. And like the PCFX, like in the PC Engine FX forums? Yeah, I mean, well, like everywhere.
Yeah.
The Super Nintendo is kind of like the underdog. Oh, nothing was good for it. But like, I will fight. I will honestly fight for the Super Nintendo as being a good console. The soundtracks, Blazion, an arcade. Blazion's the shit. See, the girlfriend says it's actually, I like the Blazion, the console, better than the arcade game.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of good Super Nintendo games that like Super Nintendo gets shown. So like so many Super Famicom games never got ported to the US, like Umahari Kawasier. There's so many good Super Nintendo games that thanks to like me having, emulation or the EverDrive, I'm getting to play now. Holy Umbrella, another really good game. Kind of linked to the past with like Western elements, but I mean, I don't like it as much as you like the N64, but
oh my god, I do not like the N64. Stop this. I'm gonna get a bad name, and then my rep's gonna go down on the forums. No, I understand what you're saying. I think that in like the arcade like community, and especially a lot of the PCFX or Genesis fans, the Super Nintendo does get shit on because of how the system was slower and it doesn't have as fast a processor, and the arcade ports generally were not as impressive as say like the Genesis versions. I know like R-Type on the Turbo plays quite a bit faster than Super R-Type does on the Super Nintendo.
yeah.
And things like that where people like rag on it about that. But in all seriousness, the Super Nintendo, I'm not saying it's the best, but the things that it did really well, it did better than any other system at the time.
Yeah. Soundtracks too, like the soundtrack they had a pretty proprietary Yamaha sound chip that they had to use, and like people that really know how to use it, like the Super Nintendo has a great soundtrack for a lot of games. Like a really crap game is Bram Stoker's Dracula for like all systems, but the Super Nintendo soundtrack, if you go and listen to it, it's amazing because like they have to use like the multi-layer like soundscapes that like Super Nintendo's good for.
Really,
and then, like, the Genesis, like they try to over funk the bass and like it just doesn't fit. Even though the game's crap in general on both systems, I'm talking about the soundtracks alone. The soundtrack on the Bram Stoker's is so good.
I think I remember the Genesis version being a little bit more fun. It plays like it's sort of like one of those Amiga style like Shadow of the Beast type games.
It's totally like an Amiga port, and that's what really plagued a lot. Like a lot of the really shit games is due to people just like them open. They were so strict with their licensing, allowing to get a game on Nintendo. The Super Nintendo, they opened up. It's like floodgates. Like basically, whatever you want, we're fine. Sunsoft became just a publisher, and they stopped making Amiga. Like anybody who wanted to port an Amiga game, come on in. It's fine. Every Amiga port's horrible. Like there was, like seriously, they're really bad ports.
Well, not Super Turrican.
Super Turrican's. Have you played it though?
Super Turrican?
Have you played it and beat it?
Yes, Super Turrican on the Super Nintendo. It's an amazing game.
Fucking frustrating. 1 and 2.
No, well, 2 is weird. I don't know. 2 was a limited release, and I don't know. It wasn't as good. But Super Turrican is a wonderful game. I love that game.
LJN would take like we had LJN just dumping whatever movie was out at the time, plus like outsource a programming crew, throw together a game, and it was crap. It was always crap.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of things that did, that does need to be ragged on for the Super Nintendo, but like, I don't know. Like Dracula X for the Super Nintendo is better than the PC Engine version.
See, you're drinking.
I have been drinking.
Some Drano.
I'm joking, obviously.
No, the Super Nintendo's got a ton of games. I mean, that was the first 16-bit system that I ever played was a Super Nintendo, and I just like my eyes just grew huge when I saw games like Super Mario World or Castlevania 4 for the first time.
Super Mario World was just that's a game I can get nostalgic for. Not necessarily a game I necessarily care for anymore, but
I love it.
Being in my bedroom, playing that and thinking, how is this doing this? This is better than an arcade game.
Yeah.
Like, it was gorgeous. And it still is. I mean, it still is a really good game, but like there was a lot of Super Nintendo games like that. Like Contra felt like an arcade game. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was awesome.
Was good. Turtles 4.
Super Metroid.
Super Metroid's good.
Yeah. Like I actually didn't like the original Metroid.
I did. I won't say I loved it, but I really liked it. I was introduced to it from my older brothers and sisters, and they played it, and and acted like it was a scary game. Like it was like playing Alien the movie.
Oh, that soundtrack.
And the soundtrack was creepy, and I just remember like being a little bit too afraid to play it, especially late at night. But the Super Nintendo Super Metroid came out when I was a little bit older. I was like 15 or 16 when it came out, and man, the music that's on it and the gameplay and everything is just out of this world. It's so well done.
How did you? Unrelated question. How did you feel about the movie Candyman? Did you see it?
I think I've seen it. I don't know.
Isn't the one where like, you look in the mirror and you say Candyman a couple times?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the same time that Super Metroid came out. I was just wondering if like you unrelated. Sorry.
I do remember that movie. Wasn't it about a bunch of kids who like were staying in this like haunted house or something like that, or where the house was, or was it just what am I thinking? Oh, I'm thinking of Mr. Giggles.
What the hell is Mr. Giggles?
You don't remember Mr. Giggles?
No.
It's not very good, but it's pretty weird. Okay, I remember Candyman. That was sort of like when I was growing up. We always heard this like, well, I don't know, old story or wives' tale or whatever you want to call it of Bloody Mary. You'd say that.
Bloody Mary's probably the folklore that Candyman wrote.
Yeah. Yep. I remember that. I tried it once and I was really creeped out by it.
You saw it. You saw it.
I don't know what I saw, but it was really creepy. And then I made him turn on the lights and we ran away. But have you ever heard of or played the Super A-Can?
No, only through Gamester, 81. I didn't even know it existed, and then I looked up auctions and the price that it goes for. And it's basically a Super Nintendo clone, I guess. Like
it really is.
Yeah, I mean the architecture and everything for it. Where did the system come out in?
I actually have no idea.
Okay.
I mean, I could look it up, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if it was like a licensing thing they didn't want to license, or if there's import fees. Because like you see a lot of things like the Master System is still a popular system in Brazil, and that's because they offered the licensing for Brazil. Brazil has like this ridiculous import tariff. So if you ship something into Brazil, it just becomes astronomical. Like I forgot, I think it was Xbox or it was PlayStation. Oh no, it was Wii U. I'm sorry. Wii U's like we're not going to sell in Brazil because we can't afford it. Like Xbox Ones are made in Brazil. PlayStation 4s are made in Brazil, and like they licensed the Master System and then later the Genesis to be made in Brazil by, I forgot the name of the company, but it's basically like our version of At Games or Jack Pacific. And they made the versions, and they came with like a Master System came with like 48 or 100 games on it, and then you could also buy games that were made in Brazil. So yeah, like a lot of like Brazil has a really big Master Systems scene still, and that's what they're nostalgic for is Master System. They're only just now getting PlayStations and other emulation out there.
That's crazy. Yeah, I knew Brazil was a big deal in the Master System market. They were like porting a lot of Game Gear games that were big in the U.S. in like the early '90s or mid '90s, and then a lot of those later games were coming out on the Master System. I think that Brazil got the original Battletoads and Battle Maniacs on the Master System, and then that was actually ported to the Super Nintendo.
Oh wow.
Which is really odd. And I've played the one on the Master System, and it's not good at all. It's like does not play very well. I'm not a huge fan of Battle Maniacs on the Super Nintendo either. Like I think that the game is okay. It's a little not. I don't know. It's just not quite as polished as like the original Battletoads or Battletoads and Double Dragon, and a few of those other ones that were really really fun in the Battletoads universe. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird seeing those games coming out for in so much later on for the Master System. It's like the Master System kind of lives on over there, whereas it was sort of passed over in the US.
Right. This is kind of unrelated, but Brazil had a whole pinball scene. Taito of Brazil, Taito, like the son of like the major legacy of Taito, opened up Taito Brazil to make pinball games, and basically because of the import tariffs, they released complete copies of popular U.S. Williams games as Taito games. They were just completely rethemed, but the layout was identical. And like,
wow.
So like, yeah, this is like, you have to think this is before internet, so like they could get away with stuff like that.
Yep.
And like, there's complete copies of Black Knight. There's complete copies of like a lot of really popular pinball games that are completely themed as Taito games. And There's actually a really good article. If you just Google, there's a Wikipedia article which links everything. If you search Taito of Brazil pinball, and that will get you a link to all of that history, which I actually only learned about last month. And
That's crazy.
I know a lot about pinball games.
Yes, you do. What are some So what are some like really underdog or obscure pinball machines that you're looking for?
I mean, underdogs. Anything can be considered underdog. Like a lot of when people first get into pinball, they like the newer games, what's called DMD, which is dot matrix display, which has all the numbers and everything. And then you'll start to, as you get older and more into the hobby, you start to appreciate like the older games, like the electromechanical games, so the score reels and the chimes. But I mean, anybody can like have a specific. They can get into like a specific thing. You can get into solid states, which I mostly like solid states, like 1980s, early 80s pinball games. You can get into like the newer games. You can get into electromechanical games. So like that's kind of a hard question to answer, but like there's a lot of pinball that's underappreciated. Like mostly when people talk about pinball games, they say their favorite games are like Terminator 2 and Addams Family and Medieval Madness. That's like the Super Mario Brothers 3. You know, that's like this. I like Super Mario Brothers 3. I like Smash, and I don't know,
Call of Duty.
Yeah, Call of Duty. Those are those games of the pinball genre, which is fine. They're good games, but once you get into it, you know, you start to dig a little bit deeper into the different games and the different shots that they offer.
Okay. That's awesome. My one of my buddies, Jason, he's actually going to be getting his 4th pinball machine.
Boom.
I think the last time we talked about it, I had mentioned that I had a friend who was into it, and he just got his 2nd pinball machine. Well, he's gotten a 3rd since then, and he is going to be getting one, I believe, right before Midwest Classic. So
yeah,
the end of March, and that's going to be a Dungeons and Dragons pinball machine.
It's actually a really cool game.
Yeah, he said it was around $1,200, which I guess is a good
deal too.
A good deal, yeah.
Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons has this amazing art. It was designed by Ward Pimbleton, which did this really untraditional outlanes. Normally, when your ball drains on the outlanes, the ball's dead. It goes away. Poor Ward Pimbleton, which did Fathom, and he did Mousing Around, and he did Dungeons and Dragons. The outlanes are actually the inlanes. So when the ball, when you think it's going to drain, it actually feeds it right to the flipper. And then the inlanes, what you think would normally feed it to the flipper, those are the drains. So like he does a little bit of, you have to get used to playing his type of games because they're very untraditional. He likes to use more than 2 flippers, and he likes to always does like custom themes and custom art. So yeah, his games are really cool, and that game is actually really cool too.
What about no, it's not Bill Pullman pinball.
Bill Paxton?
Bill Paxton pinball.
Yeah. What's his name? Mr. Hacker did that game. Ben Heck to prove that he can make a pinball game, and has since went on and designed America's Most Haunted for Spooky Pinball, which is an amazing pinball game.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he designed his own board set. It's all open source. You can basically customize anything you want in it, and has helped build what is now known as Spooky Pinball, which is their next game is going to be a Rob Zombie based game.
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, totally.
He usually has an entire room booked at the Midwest Classic, and he has the Bill Paxton pinball game in there, and he's always showing off some of his other little experiments and stuff. And I want to say the first time I met him was in 2004.
Yeah.
He was at the Midwest Classic, and he had this small little shop, not a shop, a small little area that he was working on in the game museum. And I was running what we had at the time was a Turbo Fest, which was just basically 3 or 4 TVs with turbo games hooked up right in the middle of the museum, and we just turned our stuff on and let people play all day. And he came over by us, and he was like, "Hey, can I use one of these tables?" And I'm like, this isn't my stuff, so go for it. You know, do whatever. And like later on the weekend, I found out his name was Ben Heck, and what he was doing was he was converting NES consoles into PCs. Like he was what a lot of people, I mean, would kind of consider a simple or an ordinary mod nowadays of like putting PCs inside of random things. But he was putting a PC inside of an NES box to play emulators and stuff. And the outputs were going to be USBs and stuff, and he did it during like the show, like on a Saturday or whatever, and it was really crazy to sit there and think about like, well, whoever this guy is, he's a wizard or whatever, and then to see where he's gone since then, like his whole like website and his whole kind of his career and everything is just being this crazy modder and creator of all these cool things. But it's kind of amazing.
Right, totally.
All right. Anywho, Patrick, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for jumping on. I'm happy to have you on because I was running out of words to say all by myself, by my lonesome.
My pleasure.
On the alone time. But I thank you, everybody, if you were listening. I don't know if this was live or not, but it's definitely going to be available for watching later on. We are always at the Game Huggers on Facebook page. You can check us out there. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter. Message me on Twitter if you want to hear or talk about any new upcoming topics on the Game Hump. You can follow me at _Joshua Turbo. And until next time, take it easy, guys. Thanks for listening. See you, Patrick.